How you doing? Mr. Taberry here. Today we're going to take a look at how to perform an injector balance test using a scan tool. The scan tool I'm going to be using today is going to be a Snap-on Modus. It's an older version of a Snap-on scan tool, but in my opinion, it still functions relatively well and does its job. But the purpose of this test is so that we can measure the flow of each individual injector by watching how much pressure is removed from our fuel pressure gauge. So I'm going to go ahead and connect everything, and then we'll take a quick look at it. So I'll show you the gauge that I'm going to put on, and then we'll set up the computer and we'll go through the tests. Alright, so right here the first thing we got is OTC's fuel pressure tester gauge. So it's kind of nice, it's a gauge, and then it comes with the release block. So this releases the pressure out of it, and residual gas will go out of this hose, and you just collect it into a gas can. And then it has a bunch of different adapters, and for this we're just going to use a typical GM threaded adapter that'll just go right onto the fuel rail. So I'll show you really quick how we thread the fuel pressure gauge into the fuel rail on a GM. Most GMs are relatively simple to do. So I'll give you a quick view on that, and then we'll get started with the test. Alright, so I know it's kind of bright and kind of difficult to see, but on this GM, it's a O2, it's a 3.4 liter, it's on a Chevy Venture van. The fuel tap is right here, so this is the port, and then this right here is the fuel rail. So it's kind of a sneaky place to get into. In this case, it's right next to the power steering reservoir and pump assembly. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to take the adapter, we're going to try to sneak it in here. I'm going to do the best I can without knocking anything over. So we're going to slip that in, and then thread this adapter right into place. Make sure you do the best you can and try to get a nice tight fit, so that way there's no leaks when you do this test. And then here's the other end of that hose. We're going to go ahead and connect that to the rest of the gauge. So that's a nice good connection. Alright, so right here you can get a better view. You can see where kind of the hose is routed, so it kind of swoops down, and then it goes right next to the pump and directly into the fuel rail. So now we're going to go ahead and we're going to take this section, this adapter right here, and we're going to connect it into our fuel gauge right here. So we got the line, and we just take the two ends, and then we pull back on this collar right here. So hopefully you can see that. Let's see if I can get it. Alright, so to go ahead and connect these two, you're going to take this collar right here, and you're just going to pull it back just a little bit. And when you pull it back, you go ahead and insert it and release. Give it a little tug. You got a nice, good connection. So now our gauge is connected. Okay, so next thing we're going to do is we're going to head on over to the scan tool. Alright, so I've already got my scan tool set up for the year, make, and model of the vehicle. And once you get all that information in, what you want to do is you want to go into under the main menu. It's going to ask you for engine, transmission, or body. So you're going to go under engine, and once you're under engine, you'll get the main menu for the engine. So then we got data display, codes menu, functional tests, generic functions, and troubleshooters. What you want to do for this injector balance test is you want to scroll all the way down and go to functional tests. So we'll go ahead and select functional tests, and then you'll notice fourth one down we have injector balance test. Okay, so we're going to go down, we're going to select injector balance. Okay, it's my fault. Whenever you do this, make sure you got the key on in the run position. Otherwise, your scan tool just won't communicate with the computer. Okay, now what you may have noticed, as soon as I went ahead and initialized the key, I turned the key into the run position, the computer fired up, and our fuel pump kicked in. So I'm going to go ahead and lower this so you can actually see the scan tool and the fuel pressure gauge off on the bottom left. Alright, so now that I've got my key on, everything's good, in the right position, we take a look at our fuel pressure gauge. Right now we're right around pretty close to 45 psi over there. And then over here on our scan tool, it says injector balance and ensure all fuel injector lines are connected. Pressure gauge is connected to the fuel line. So we're going to go ahead, select yes. Okay. We hit yes again. And now it gives us our roster of all 6 injectors. So we're going to go through one injector at a time. And what you want to do at this point is just go ahead and select it. And when I select the first injector, first thing that the computer does is primes up the fuel pump. So we should see an increase in fuel pump pressure. Okay, so right there, my fuel pressure is now sitting at 52 psi. So I want to go ahead and record that. Okay, so right here is just a real generic sheet I made up on the fly here, just so I can write down the initial, after the pulse, and then the loss of each injector. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to get the initial and after the pulse for each injector first, and then I'll go through and calculate the loss once I'm completely done, to determine if all my injectors are flowing relatively the same. So for the first injector, the initial would be our 52 psi. That's what our gauge is sitting at right now. After the pulse will be the next step of this test. So the first thing you want to write down is 52 psi. So we'll go ahead and take another look at the gauge and the scan tool. So right here we're sitting at about 52. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and hit yes, and then we're going to pulse the injector. Alright, so after the pulse, if we take a closer look right here, it may be difficult to see, but we are right at 30 psi. So we'll come down here, and then we'll fill out psi for after the pulse, and we'll go through and we'll knock out the rest of the injectors. So next step I'm going to do, once I'm done and I got that reading, and what you'll also note is the pressure over here, it'll actually start to creep back up. Take the initial loss. So once it drops all the way down to its lowest reading, mark that reading right away. Okay, disregard that little pickup right there. Once we're done, want to hit yes to continue. This will take you back to the screen. And notice how now we're missing the number 1 injector. So it'll take us right to the remaining injectors in this test. So we'll go through and we'll test the rest of them. We'll hit injector 2. Fuel pump pressure picks up, settles at 52. Mark that on the sheet. Hit yes. And in this case, it drops all the way down to, it looks like, 32. And I'm just going to go through real quick and knock out the rest of them. Alright, so once you're done with the last one, it says stopping communication and it kicks you out because you're done testing all those injectors. The PCM will not allow you to test any more injectors again due to the fact that it's not going to let you flood that engine with gasoline. So you have to start it up, run a key cycle. I would let it run for about a minute to 5 minutes just to clear out all that fuel if you're going to run the test again for whatever reason. Okay. Here at the high school, obviously we run this test multiple times, so it's very important that we run it in between each time. All right, so now we'll take a look in the sheet, and the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to calculate all this up and then show you the loss for every single cylinder, and we'll see if there's any imperfections. What we want to try to stay away from is pretty much anything greater than 2 psi loss of a difference from all of these. They should be, for the most part, right on par with one another. Alright, so you can see after running all these tests and doing the calculations, so here's our total loss across each cylinder, and if you notice, all of our cylinders are within 1 psi of themselves, except for injector number 1. So injector number 1 flows at 22 psi, but that still falls within our 2 psi margin of one another. So all in all, I would give these injectors an okay rating. Now that doesn't indicate if the spray pattern is in good shape or whatever the case may be, but at least we know that as far as flow restrictions, we don't have any issues with these injectors. So the next thing we got to do is disconnect the scan tool from the vehicle, and then remove the fuel pressure tester and start the vehicle up. Alright, well, of course our battery's starting to go low on our car. So now what we have to do is back out of the scan tool so it's not communicating with the vehicle anymore. So just hit the no button over on the far right, and then just keep hitting this until it's backed out, usually until you can start seeing VIN information. Then you know with all degree of certainty that it's not communicating with the computer anymore, so we're good to go ahead and shut the ignition off and disconnect the fuel pressure gauge. So to bleed out the pressure of the fuel pressure gauge, just hit this button over here, and then there goes the rest of the pressure. So it gets released through this hose right down here, which then leads back into a gas can, which we could put back into the vehicle. Now we're safe to go ahead and disconnect it from the engine, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. And once I'm done, we'll fire up the vehicle. Alright, so now we'll go ahead and fire it up and see how she runs, and hopefully it'll run long enough, we'll clear it all out. Alright, there you go. Started right up. Ran pretty good. So that is how you perform an injector balance test. So, thanks for watching. Alright, now we're going to take a look at how to do an injector balance test without a scan tool and by using a OTC injector fuel tester. So these work pretty well, except the only downside is they have a pretty basic connector on the end of it. So this fits like most of your old school GM fuel injectors, well, like foreign and domestic, but not all of the injectors have the same electrical connectors. So they've modified them, so now we have to use an adapter to this. So OTC came up with an adapter, and it's just these wires right here that plug into it. So I'm going to show you how to go ahead and tap into a different style of an injector so we can do a balance test on it. So same things apply. Get yourself a fuel pressure gauge, tap it into the fuel rail, and then we'll go ahead and we'll connect up the tester. Alright, with your fuel pressure gauge already connected, we're going to go ahead and we're going to take our tester right here, and we're going to connect it directly to the battery. So that's your first step you're going to do. Electrical connections for this are real simple. Positive to positive, negative to negative. Once you're connected, you get a power light that pops up, and that's how you know you're good. Okay. Next step, we're going to go ahead and we're going to take the adapters right here, and we're going to plug them into this terminal. So inside of this terminal you can see two electrical connections, and then on this adapter harness you'll see two blade terminals. The opposite side has just two open terminals. This is the injector side, this is the tester side. So what we're going to do is just take the blades and just put them directly inside of right inside of the tester, just like that. Okay. Now we'll take a look at the injector connector itself, and then I'll show you how to connect these guys. Alright, so on these GM connectors, what you got to do is there's this blue clip. So you pull this blue clip up, and once that's up, you can go ahead and push on a tab in the back, and then you can release that clip. And the harness comes away, and you can see how it's a different looking harness. And what we're going to do is we're going to tap those auxiliary leads into those two terminals in our fuel injector. Now it's a little hard to see, but there's two metal terminals on the inside there. So we're just going to take these open sides and connect them directly into it. Once you got a connection, the next thing you're going to do is we're going to check it with the tester. So we'll zoom out here. So we'll go ahead and we'll take the tester, and what we're going to do is we're going to set it up for just one pulse, and we're going to listen for a click. And if you don't get a click, that means you don't have a good connection. So we'll go back and we'll try to reset the connection. Okay, so we got our connection made in the fuel injector. Next thing I want to do is I want to come up here and I'm going to push this button, and I'm just going to check it to see if it clicks. I don't know if you can hear that, but it's activating. So now we're going to go ahead and turn the key, prime the pump, and check the injector. Alright, so right there, right around 42 psi. So what we're going to do is we're going to pulse the injector, just like I showed you in the other video, except we're going to use this OTC. So we're going to go down to the 50 pulse section right down there, and then we'll hit it and find out where our pressure lies. So right there, it dropped all the way down to roughly 16 psi, and then it's starting to bump back up. So you go through this process, and you can do it for each injector, and it works just the same as utilizing a scan tool. Okay, now we're going to take a look at a vehicle where if we're going to do an injector balance and we can't see the injectors, we can't gain access to them, and we don't have the option for using a scan tool to actually turn or pulse the injectors on or off. So I'll show you guys how to get around that. So right now we're working on a 2004 Ford Escape with a 3.0 liter. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to locate our injector wiring harness, and then shortly after that we're going to hook up a fuel pressure gauge. Alright, so this is our fuel injector wiring harness. It's located right down here. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and we're going to disconnect this. This is wired up and it goes underneath the composite intake manifold, which is right here. So we'll go ahead and we'll pull this apart, and once we get it apart, then we'll move on to our next step. Alright, so there we go. The next step we're going to perform is we're going to hook up our fuel pressure gauge. So kind of hard to get a shot of this, so we're going to kind of come down. The fuel pressure rail tap is located directly underneath the throttle body. So and it's kind of hard to see because the fuel pressure regulator hose, vacuum hose is right in the way, but the fuel pressure rail tap is this guy right back here. Okay, so I have a hose attached to that right here, and that's coming all the way around to my gauge. Okay, so our fuel pressure gauge is attached. So next step is we're going to go to a wiring diagram and see what wires we need to back. Alright, so right here is our diagram for our fuel injectors. We need this so we know which wires to actually connect to in order to energize an individual injector. Now with the harness disconnected, our injector balance tester is going to supply both power and ground to the fuel injector. So we're going to go with injector number 2. I'm just going to demonstrate one of these for you. So it's got a red wire up on top and then a white wire down on the bottom. So the white wire is going to be the controlled ground, the red wire is going to be power. If you take a look across all of them, what you'll notice is they all have red across the top. So that means all of your injectors are powered off of the same wire, which makes sense because they're all just wired up in parallel. And then each individual driver from the PCM is going to have a different colored wire for ground. So what we're going to do now is we're going to back probe the number 2 injector at the connector, and we're going to look for the red wire and the white wire. Alright, so it'll be a little tricky to see here, but I'm going to try to go ahead and back probe these. So first wire I'm going to back probe is going to be this red wire. So I'm going to go in here at my lead, and back probe it all the way inside of that terminal. And that's on the solid red wire. So the next one that I'm going to back probe is going to be the white wire. And this one may be a little tricky to try to see. But there's that white wire right inside of there. And there we go. Back out here. Alright, so there's my harness right here. And notice this is the injector side of the harness. This is not the PCM side. So you want to make sure that you back probe into the injector side. And then all I did right here was just take some jumper leads, just cut them in half and just soldered in some T-pins right on the back side. So you got nice back probe leads. Okay. Alright, now I've got my injector tester wired up to the battery. And then right here I'm going to set this up to a 50 pulses. Oops. Now we're going to go ahead and we're going to take these two leads and we're going to connect them directly up to these open spots right here. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to turn the key and we're going to prime the fuel pump. So now we're going to turn the key, we're going to prime the fuel pump, and then we'll go ahead and give it a test. Alright, so it might be a little difficult to see. I'll try to zoom in here real quick. So our fuel pressure is right around 58 psi. So the next thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and pulse the injector. So here's my tester right here. We're set up to 50 pulses. We're going to hit it. And we drop down to 48 psi. So we would drop from roughly 58 to 48. So that's a 10 psi drop. And you just do the same procedure for the 5 other injectors and you're good to go. Okay. Thanks for watching.